My father waited until the applause for his retirement speech faded, before he lifted his glass and looked directly at me. "I'm officially cutting off my son," he announced. "He's brought dishonor to this family." The room went silent. 40 guests stared at me. My in-laws froze. My mother lowered her eyes. Then I saw the one face that mattered most. My 8-year-old daughter. She was holding a slice of cake with both hands, her smile disappearing as every word landed on her like a stone. "Dad," she whispered, looking at me instead of him, as if asking whether she had done something wrong. I wanted to answer. Instead, I swallowed the anger burning in my throat. My father kept talking, listing every disappointment he believed I'd become. According to him, I had wasted my career, embarrassed the family, and married a woman who was never around. He conveniently ignored one detail. My wife wasn't absent because she didn't care. She was serving overseas in the military. He knew that. He simply didn't think anyone in that room would question his version of the story. People avoided my eyes. Some nodded awkwardly. Others quietly stepped away, afraid that standing beside me might stain them too. I knelt beside my daughter and wiped a tear from her cheek. "It's okay," I lied softly. But it wasn't. 3 days later, my military wife walked through our front door carrying a single sealed folder. She looked at me, then at our frightened daughter, and said 5 words that changed everything. "It's time they hear the truth." I had spent most of my life believing that keeping the peace was the same as earning respect. My father believed respect came from obedience, and whenever those two ideas collided, mine was always the one that lost. Growing up, I was the quiet son who fixed problems without asking for credit. If something broke, I repaired it. If someone needed help, I showed up. My father rarely noticed those moments because they didn't fit the image he had already built of me. He wanted a son who chased titles, wealth, and public praise. I chose a steadier life, working long hours, raising my daughter with patience, and supporting my wife's military career, even through long deployments. To him, that looked like weakness. To me, it was love. When my wife was called overseas, I became both father and mother at home. School lunches, homework, bedtime stories, nightmares after thunderstorms, learned every part of our daughter's world while counting the days, until my wife came home safely. My father never called to ask how we were doing. When he did reach out, it was usually to remind me that I had settled for less, and embarrassed the family by letting my wife wear the uniform while I stayed behind. I stopped defending myself years ago because I realized he never wanted answers, only agreement. What hurt most wasn't losing his approval. It was watching my daughter slowly believe that her grandfather's opinion might be the truth. I promised myself that if the day ever came when the truth could speak for itself, I wouldn't interrupt it. The days after the retirement party felt strangely quiet, but silence has a way of carrying old wounds farther than loud arguments ever could. My phone stayed mostly still. A few relatives sent short messages saying they were sorry things got awkward. None of them questioned what my father had said. They only wished it had happened somewhere less public, as though the embarrassment mattered more than the lie. My daughter asked me a question I wasn't ready to answer. Did Grandpa stop loving us? I smiled gently, tucked her blanket around her shoulders, and told her that sometimes people let pride speak louder than love. She nodded, but I could see she was trying to understand something no child should have to carry. Meanwhile, my father continued acting as though his announcement had settled everything. I heard from my cousin that he was proudly telling neighbors he had finally removed the family's biggest disappointment. He spoke with calm confidence, certain no one would ever challenge his version of events. Looking back, I realized the retirement speech wasn't an isolated moment. It was simply the first time he had chosen a microphone instead of a dinner table. There had always been small cuts. He introduced my younger brother as the successful one, while calling me still figuring life out. At birthdays, he praised expensive gifts before quietly setting mine aside without opening them. Whenever my wife was deployed, he would shake his head and murmur that a real family wouldn't live that way. Each insult was delivered with a polite smile, soft enough to escape criticism, but sharp enough to leave a mark. He believed careful cruelty left no witnesses. He never imagined someone had been collecting the truth all along. On the 3rd evening after my father's speech, I was helping my daughter finish her homework when I heard a car pull into the driveway. She looked up before I did. "Mom?" The front door opened, and my wife stepped inside wearing civilian clothes, her duffel bag over one shoulder. My daughter ran into her arms so hard that they nearly fell together. I watched them hold each other, and for the first time in days, the weight on my chest eased. Then my wife looked at me. "I heard everything," she said quietly. "Someone at the retirement party had recorded my father's speech and sent it to her overseas before she boarded her flight home. She had watched every second alone, unable to defend us from thousands of miles away. She didn't look angry. She looked disappointed. Without another word, she placed a thick sealed folder on the kitchen table. I requested permission to bring these home. Inside were official documents, emails, financial records, and signed statements that stretched back years. She had been gathering them long before the retirement party, never to attack my father, but to protect us if his stories ever became something more dangerous than family gossip. As we read through the pages together, a pattern became impossible to ignore. Every rumor he had spread, every accusation he had made, and every lie about our marriage could be matched with evidence, proving the opposite. I finally understood something that changed me. I didn't need to convince him that I deserved respect. I only needed to stop protecting the lies that allowed him to take it away. That night we made one quiet decision. The next conversation with my father would happen only once, and this time, the truth would be speaking for us. The next morning, we spread every document across the dining room table and looked at them the way investigators study evidence, not as angry family members, but as people separating facts from stories. My wife had learned that discipline during years of military service. She never rushed toward conflict. She prepared until the outcome spoke for itself. We organized everything into dated folders. One section contained text messages where my father claimed I had abandoned my family whenever my wife deployed. Another held school records, emergency contacts, and attendance logs showing I had been the parent signing every permission slip, attending every conference, and caring for our daughter alone during those months. There were financial records proving that while my father publicly called me irresponsible, I'd quietly helped pay several of his unexpected expenses without ever mentioning it to anyone. The most important file wasn't about money. It contained emails and voice messages showing that my father had deliberately hidden invitations, twisted conversations, and told relatives false stories to isolate us from the rest of the family. Every document came from an original source. Every date matched. Every claim could be verified. We contacted an attorney, not because we wanted revenge through a courtroom, but because we wanted to understand our rights. If the lies continued to damage our reputation or affect our daughter, the lawyer gave simple advice. Don't argue with accusations. Preserve evidence. Let people discover the truth themselves. That became our strategy. No emotional social media posts. No late-night phone calls. No public arguments. We would simply place the facts where they belonged and allow my father's own words to stand beside them. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for his next move. I was ready for it. A week after my wife came home, my aunt called to say the family was gathering for a Sunday lunch. My father would be there, confident as ever, expecting everyone to move on as though his retirement speech had become the official version of our lives. We arrived on time. No speeches, no dramatic entrance. My wife carried the same folder that had been sitting on our dining table all week. When my father casually repeated that he had finally told everyone the truth, my wife quietly asked, "Would you mind if we looked at the facts instead?" The room fell still. She placed the documents on the table one by one. A school principal's letter thanked me for never missing a parent meeting during her deployments. Bank records showed the support we had given my father when he claimed I had never helped him. Printed emails revealed how he had deliberately misled relatives by changing details, leaving out messages, and creating conflicts that never existed. No one interrupted. The only sound was paper turning from one page to the next. My father tried to explain, then stopped halfway through his sentence. Every excuse collapsed against a document with a date, a signature, or his own words. Around the table, faces began to change. People who had avoided looking at me during his retirement party now looked directly at me. Not with pity, with regret. My daughter reached for my hand beneath the table. She smiled, a small, relieved smile I hadn't seen since the day her grandfather rejected us. I squeezed her hand gently. I hadn't come to humiliate my father. I had come to return the truth to the people it had been taken from. In that silent room, reputation didn't change because I argued louder. It changed because the facts refused to whisper anymore. No one rushed to fill the silence after the last document was read. My father remained seated, staring at the table as though the polished wood could offer him an escape. For the first time in my life, he had no speech prepared, no clever explanation, and no audience willing to accept his version without question. One by one, relatives began speaking, not to defend him, but to apologize to us. My cousin admitted he had repeated my father's stories without ever asking whether they were true. My aunt quietly confessed she had stopped inviting us to family gatherings because she believed we wanted nothing to do with them. Even my father-in-law, who had remained cautious for years, shook my hand and said, "I should have trusted the man my daughter married." None of those words erased the past, but they reminded me that truth has a quiet way of rebuilding what lies slowly destroy. The biggest change happened beside me. My daughter no longer looked confused whenever someone mentioned her grandfather. She held her head higher, laughed more easily, and stopped asking whether our family had done something wrong. Watching that burden disappear from her shoulders mattered more than repairing my own reputation. As for my father, people didn't reject him overnight. They simply became careful around him. They questioned his stories instead of accepting them, and the certainty he had enjoyed for years slowly disappeared. That was consequence enough. I learned something I wish I had understood much earlier. When someone builds their influence on your silence, telling the truth isn't an act of revenge, it's an act of freedom. And sometimes the people who need that freedom most are the ones quietly watching how you choose to stand back up. My father called 2 weeks later. His voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. He didn't begin with excuses. He didn't defend the speech or blame anyone else. After a long silence, he quietly said, "I was wrong." For years, I had imagined that hearing those words would feel like victory. Instead, they felt peaceful. I told him I accepted his apology, but forgiveness wasn't the same as pretending nothing had happened. Trust had been broken in front of my daughter, and rebuilding it would take actions, not promises. To my surprise, he didn't argue. He simply nodded and said he understood. Since then, our relationship has changed. We speak occasionally, always with clear boundaries. If respect disappears, so do I. My wife and I agreed that our home would never again become a place where lies were welcomed simply because they came from family. Our daughter is older now in the ways that matter most. She knows that love should never require silence, and that kindness is strongest when it stands beside the truth. When she asks about her grandfather, she no longer asks whether we were the problem. She asks whether people can really change. I tell her they can, but only when they choose honesty over pride. Looking back, I realize my greatest act of revenge wasn't exposing my father's lies. It was refusing to let those lies define the next chapter of our lives. We built a quieter home, a stronger marriage, and a family where respect is earned through actions instead of demanded through fear. My father once believed he could erase my place in the family with a single speech. In the end, the truth didn't raise its voice. It simply stayed standing long after every lie had fallen silent.